Recording in progress.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Keys, Deputy CEO here at NADA, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar this afternoon on the New South Wales Community Services Industry Scheme, which is a new portable long service leave scheme for the community services sector. I'd like to start by proudly acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways which we are all meeting from today. The NADA office here stands on the beautiful lands of the Gadigal and Birrabirragal people. I extend this acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are attending this afternoon, as well as Aboriginal people and organisations who work across our sector to deliver vital supports to community. We look to and learn from their cultural guidance, leadership and wisdom to enrich the work we do and achieve better outcomes. I pay respect to elders past, present and emerging and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I also want to proudly recognise people with living and lived experience of alcohol or other drug use, acknowledging their important role in shaping policy, education and services. We acknowledge that through their guidance, diverse experience and peer support, lives are saved and health outcomes are realised. We acknowledge that this participation takes courage, gives a voice and reduces stigma and discrimination in our community. So just by way of an introduction around the purpose of the webinar today and what we will cover, as you will probably by now be aware, the New South Wales Government is soon to be introducing a new portable long service leave scheme for people working in community services in New South Wales. This will allow workers to claim for long service leave if they've continued to work in the community services sector, even if they've worked for more than one employer. This is a workforce retention strategy that's been operating in other jurisdictions such as WA, South Australia, the ACT and Queensland, and it seeks to support individuals to remain within community services, which is often characterised by short-term contracts and less secure funding, and that sees people needing to change jobs where they would otherwise lose their accrued long service leave. NADA has been involved in consultations regarding the scheme held by the New South Wales Department of Customer Service over the last year, and along with other NGO peaks, we've provided advice and feedback in the interests of members. NADA continues to advocate alongside other NGO peaks on the importance of minimising financial and administrative impacts of the scheme for organisations and for funding to cover the costs of the scheme. The financial impact of the scheme has been raised with the New South Wales Health Minister's Office and at the New South Wales Ministry of Health NGO Advisory Group. We asked that the New South Wales Government consider this impact as part of the New South Wales budget to apply indexation that would cover this impact. The Ministry took on an action to discuss with DCJ as the agency that funds the most NGOs, and NCOS have also raised the matter directly with Treasury. So in response to requests from members, we've planned today's webinar to provide members with an overview of the scheme, how it will be implemented, and how organisations can be prepared. We also want to point out the resources and support available from the Long Service Corporation so that you can remain updated, know how to access information and updates over time, and where to go for help. We'll also be providing plenty of opportunity to ask questions today at key points throughout the presentations and at the conclusion. In terms of the format for today, we will be using the Q&A function only. If you have a question for any panelist, please post this in the Q&A, and this will be monitored and presented at different times to the relevant panelists. We've disabled all other functions, and the reason that we've chosen this setting is because we are recording today to be used as a resource for those that can't attend, and this will provide a more streamlined experience. Okay, it's now my pleasure to welcome some guest presenters that we have with us today, and I'll invite them each to introduce themselves. First, I call on Michaela.
Hello, thank you, Chris, and thanks for having me along today. So my name is Michaela Beale. I'm leading the stakeholder engagement for the new portable long service leave for the community services industry. So happy to be working with your organisation, and thanks for the opportunity to present at the webinar today.
Thank you, Michaela. Carol.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, my name is Carol Tran, and I'm one of the co-CEOs at Accounting for Good. And at Accounting for Good, we work with not-for-profits and provide them with their accounting and reporting services when they maybe don't have an in-house person to help them. But maybe I'll introduce my co-CEO, Paula, as well.
Hi everyone, I'm the other co-CEO at Accounting for Good. Yeah, and as Carol said, we work with charities and not-for-profits to provide them with financial management services. So happy to be here and happy to learn about this new long service leave scheme, the portable long service leave scheme.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So it's now my pleasure. I'm going to hand over to Michaela, who is going to run us through a presentation. Michaela will be inviting questions at key points throughout her presentation as well as at the conclusion. Thanks, Michaela.
Thank you, and just confirming I'm sharing my screen now. Excellent. So yes, look, this new scheme, it came in as part of an election commitment from the NSW Government to address some of the concerns that are faced for this industry, and to help, as Chris said, to help build the workforce. There's two existing schemes with the New South Wales Long Service Corporation. There is a building and construction scheme and a contract cleaning scheme. And I think this new community services scheme is part of a bigger plan to start including more sectors into portable long service leave options. So most of you would be familiar with traditional long service leave. You've worked for an organisation for 10 years, you get a period of paid leave. That's under the 1955 Long Service Leave Act. But we know from community services that there's often not that opportunity to get to 10 years tenure. A lot of programs, funding changes, there's changes with grants, changes to organisations. It's often not an option for people to get to that 10-year point. So hence the portable long service leave scheme coming in, and it's coming in from the 1st of July this year. It allows workers to accrue their long service leave across working with any number of employers. So what it's actually counting is your service to the community services industry rather than your service to just one particular employer. Now, under the new scheme, workers will be eligible to take leave after 7 years of service to the industry. There's a couple of good benefits that come with it. There is what we're calling a foundation worker bonus. So for workers who are included as workers during the first 6 months that the scheme is open, they will be registered as foundation workers, and they actually get a bonus of 365 days of service credits, which is basically a year in their long service leave bank. That's a great acknowledgement of the skills and experience and knowledge that people will bring to the industry when they join this scheme. Now, the new scheme will be supported by a levy payment. It's a quarterly payment that will need to be made by employers or any self-employed contractors who opt into the scheme. Now, the scope of community services, very broad, 31 different types of community services work. So just noting here too that people can not only change employers, but they can change, the type of community services work that they do as well. any work that's conducted within any of these 31 sectors will count in their long service leave balance. A couple of key ones to point out that are out of scope. One is the early childhood education space is not included in here, and the residential aged care space is also not included into this. Although programs like home care packages, supports that help people to stay in their home, whether they're older people or people with disability, that comes under the community care services category. So they will be included with the scheme. There's a huge scope there. And as I've mentioned before, we're very, very grateful to NADA for, for opening the doors here for this network and for these workers, and to help share this information. Now, the eligibility for the scheme, there's two different types of eligibility. One is where the employer identifies as a community service provider. And in that situation, all workers within that organisation are eligible and need to be registered for the scheme. So that's CEOs, frontline support workers, admin staff, anyone who works for that organisation is considered to be contributing to the community services space. Now, the other option, and I'm hoping we'll open it out for some questions soon, but where a worker themselves is delivering community services work, but that's not the broader picture of what their organisation does. Now, an example that was told to me recently was some universities might employ a financial counsellor to help people with their HECS debts and manage their payments with that. That worker is doing community services work, one of the 31 categories, but that employer is not a community services provider. So that employer would need to register the eligible workers, but they don't need to register all of their workers. Where the community services organisation identifies as a community service provider, all the workers are included in the scheme. Now, I'll note down there about self-employed contractors. So they are the only ones for whom this scheme is optional. If somebody is working for themselves and they want to use this as a way of budgeting and planning for a future holiday or future leave for themselves, they can opt into the scheme, but their participation isn't mandatory. Now, a couple of outer scopes here. Anybody who's working in the federal, state or local government spaces, they're out of scope for this scheme. They're already on a fairly generous, long service deal as they are. Where an organisation has partners run by a partnership, or whether it's a corporation, the partners or directors are also out of scope for this scheme. But as I mentioned, if somebody is employed as a CEO, they are included. Now, that whole question of employers' predominant purpose has been our first big challenge here. The Act was written and left very broad on purpose to allow for as many workers as possible to be able to make use of the scheme. The wording around employers' predominant purpose, though, is one that we're currently working through some guidelines on what that needs to look like. So the first thing for us has been to get descriptions of what each of the different 31 categories of community service work covers. As I mentioned, community care is kind of a little bit broad. I think your alcohol and other drug services, it's just noted on the bottom of the screen there, programs focused on prevention, treatment and recovery for individuals dealing with substance abuse and support for affected families and communities. That is currently in consultation. So we're keen to hear any feedback if you feel that definition doesn't accurately describe the work that you do. Now, for employers, they will need to make a determination. They will actually need to self-assess whether their predominant purpose is community services work or whether they have a different predominant purpose and they just employ some workers. There'll be a multi-factor test for doing this, and the greatest weight is going to be on what the organisation's core activities and resource allocation is about, but it will take into account the bigger picture. Things like a mission statement, constitution, strategic objectives, key performance indicators, anything that helps support that determination of whether they are or are not, predominant purpose community services work. And there'll be a process, if workers dispute that, if an organisation doesn't register, but a worker feels that they should be registered with the scheme, there'll be a process for people to come to us and to work through those guidelines. The intention with the guidelines is that they are clear, they're transparent, and they're consistent. For organisations to understand how to determine that purpose, for workers to understand whether they should or shouldn't be included in the scheme, and also for the Long Service Corporation to then know what grounds they have to dispute, whether an organisation should be registered or not. Now I'm going to pause at this point. The situation of the eligible workers, so where an organisation is not necessarily doing community service work, but the worker themselves in. Is this something that you think might come up a lot for your network, for this space, for workers in this area?
Thanks,
Does anybody have
Michaela.
any comments on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that for the majority of our members, it should be quite straightforward. I think the description of services is really clear. We haven't got any questions from attendees today, which may also be an indication that it seems quite straightforward. But we are happy beyond this webinar, we're happy to hear feedback from people and feed that back to you. Yeah.
Look, I think some categories will be more mixed than others. And I think if in this space it's quite clear, you work here, you work for an organisation that does this type of work, it should be fairly straightforward. So that's good to hear.
We have just had a comment around the language, which is an easy fix, that we use the term substance use.
Okay. Yep. All right. And that's what we need to check in for, because yes.
Yeah.
We're grateful to that sort of partnership and the collaboration. It helps us get the message right.
Great. And we've got some other comments coming through. Brent from ACON saying, I think we do have workers who do not do community work.
Okay.
And some curiosity as to why the transfer of long service leave from NGO to government sector is not supported.
Look, in terms of, I'll go the ACON question first probably.
Yep.
So if ACON as an organisation identifies as a community service organisation under the guidelines and the definitions that we give, then all of the workers in that organisation will need to be registered with the scheme, even if they're not doing, frontline community services work. So I mentioned, admin staff, people in research, people in, who are doing other elements that contribute to the work that is happening in your space. All of that work is considered to be contributing to the community services sector. Now, sorry, what was the second question?
The second question, and I can also comment on it if you like, is why the scheme, why the transfer of long service leave from NGO to government is not supported. Our experience in the sector has been that often the wages and conditions offered in government sector means that there's a lot of incentive for people to move over. And the scheme itself, as it has been run in other jurisdictions as well, is focusing on retaining people within the NGO sector who often, as I said earlier, due to less secure funding, find that they need to change jobs more frequently. And we don't want to lose those good people from the NGO sector. But Michaela, you might have more to say on it.
Look, I would echo that. This is certainly intended to be something that allows for future sector growth. There doesn't look to be any downturn of any of the community services space as things get tougher, as cost of living crisis and, all of the challenges that people are facing. There's more need for community services. So the intention is that it does keep those skills, knowledge and experience in the industry, that it can be that incentive to hang out for a bit longer, also to allow for a little bit of flexibility in changing roles. Sometimes people might need to just step back a little bit for a little while. I think the work that you're doing is probably pretty tough at times. You've been in amongst working with families and it could get quite intense. So, having that flexibility of portable long service leave hopefully will allow people to manage their work-life balance and, still keep any entitlements that they have rather than having to lose them by changing jobs.
Thanks, Michaela. We've got some other questions that are relevant to what I know is coming from you. So I'm just going to, hand back over to you.
All right. Well, we'll move on to the next bit, which is a question that we've received a lot of feedback about. How does it work with what we've already got? So this doesn't replace any existing entitlements that people might have, either under the 1955 Long Service Leave Act, where people can claim their leave after 10 years, or there are a lot of people who may be on an enterprise agreement, and we've heard situations where that allows for long service leave after 5 years. So it doesn't replace any of those entitlements. The employers remain responsible for any entitlements that are accrued before the 1 July date. So for me, and sorry about the hands here, part Italian, but the 1 July is the line in the sand. Before that, your employer is still responsible for whatever entitlements you have accrued. From 1 July, employers will then need to make those long service contributions to the fund instead of retaining them. Ideally, an employer would be retaining and popping some funds aside against those future long service claims. Instead of now retaining them themselves, they will be paid into the fund. So workers who've got any existing entitlement, either under the 1955 Act or an enterprise agreement, they can still take their leave when they're entitled to. There'll be a transitional period where, just say somebody's been working for their existing organisation for 5 years and they're under the 1955 Act, not an enterprise agreement. So they would be entitled to long service leave in 5 more years, making it, the 10 years under the Long Service Leave Act. What would happen in that situation is that the employer would need to cover the 5-year portion that they're responsible for. The employer would then need to make a claim against the Long Service Leave Fund for the following 5 years. So the employer pays out the full long service leave amount to their worker. They cover the 5 years that they were entitled, they were responsible for themselves, and they seek reimbursement of 5 years' worth of funding from the Long Service Corporation. Does that make sense? Yes, and any questions on that one? Because it's one we've had a lot come up. Where do we stand? It doesn't replace anything you already have, but there'll be a sharing period of time until the people are all on the new scheme. Any questions on that one that we've got come through?
Thanks, Michaela. That was really clear. We do have a question that says, what happens if a worker leaves before 1st of July and has been in the industry for at least 7 years? Is it possible to apply for a transfer?
No, it's not, unfortunately. Sorry to say that 1 July 2025 is very much the line in the sand. Beyond that point, if somebody's still working after the 1st of July, they've obviously got some then entitlement with the scheme. If they're working with the organisation after the 1st of July, they would qualify for that foundation worker bonus, giving them 365 days worth of service credits in the bank. But if they do leave prior to 1 July, unfortunately, they will be entitled to whatever they are already entitled to, which under the 1955 Act, unfortunately, at 7 years, there isn't anything.
And would a worker who leaves the NGO sector and goes to government, I'm assuming once the scheme's in place, at least get a long service leave payment, even though they can't take their accrued long service leave with them?
There is a couple of options that I will get to down the track at the end of this presentation where people can cash out of the system after they have been employed for 5 years. So 5 years into the new scheme, 5 years after 1 July 2025, if someone is leaving the sector permanently, they can take a cash payout rather than taking it as leave. Now, there's also options to have breaks in service. You can have up to 4 years gap in your service without losing any entitlements that are with the scheme. So that might be somebody who wants to, take a different role for 12 months or, up to 4 years. But it also allows for things like people to have families or caregiving responsibilities or, travel, study. There's a lot of flexibility in that, if you've got whatever's in your bank, you can have up to 4 years of away from the industry and not lose those entitlements.
Thanks, Michaela. There's a question around the transition process sounding cumbersome. What support is available to help people through that?
And look, we are aware of that there'll certainly be some more resources in how to do that. Our previous schemes with the Long Service Corporation for particularly the contract cleaning system, there is some resources that they have. It would be a case of, there is also provisions for not double dipping here as well to make sure that, only one payment is being made out. If a worker is intending to take their long service leave and make the employer to make the claim on the scheme, there's a process for doing that. So they do need to let the corporation know. There's then a little bit of assessment, particularly also with other interstate schemes. If somebody's worked in Queensland and New South Wales or in Victoria and New South Wales, there's a little bit of, ratifying, I suppose, what the entitlement is for that person. You can't be claiming on both schemes, but there will be a process and more information will be shared about that the closer we get to the date.
Great. And the last question from Melissa is that the mention of the bonus 365 days credit for those who sign up early. Who's responsible for the cost of that bonus? That's
a gift from the Long Service Corporation. So what we do is once you're registered into the scheme, if you're a worker in those first 6 months of the scheme, that 12-month bonus is automatically applied to your account. So each worker will have an account, a record with the Long Service Corporation, and there's that option to include that foundation worker bonus, and that automatically takes their service credits up to 365 days and then builds from there.
Great. I'll hand back to you for the next part of your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Breaks in service, leaving the scheme. We've kind of mentioned that one. So yeah, just the timeframes on there. So for people who do want to leave the industry permanently, they do need to have had 5 years with the scheme, and they can take that as a pro rata payment. As well as the gap of and up to 4 years of the service records, there are other things, what's called non-service days, prescribed non-service days. Now, these can be added to a worker's record to cover absences from work, that might include things like community work, maternity leave, caregiving, illness or injury, and situations of domestic or family violence. Serious issues there affecting immediate family members are also included. And if an employer wants to add non-service days to a worker's record, they will need to complete a form and submit that to the Long Service Corporation. So, we do need to be notified of that, but once, we get that notification and if it meets the requirements, then those non-service days are added. Basically, it means it just adds to that 4 years. So they can have up to 4 years gap. If somebody's off on maternity leave for 12 months, this would be an extra 12 months that they would get to add on to that 4 years. So effectively then being 5 years, 4 years gap of 12 months being a non-service period. I know there's a whole lot of new terms coming in here. We will certainly, be sharing them as much as we can. Service returns and service records are the terms that the Long Service Corporation uses. Now, in preparing for the new scheme, I've mentioned about predominant purpose. So from 1 July, it's really important that employers have determined that predominant purpose and understand if they need to register all or only some of their workers. There'll be an online process for employer registration. The employers from 1 July will need to track their workers' eligible worker service. Now, the sort of records that will need to be kept is the period of their workers' employment. So each service return is done for a quarter. You'll need to list down who your workers are, the period in that quarter in which they were employed. They need to record the total gross ordinary wages paid to each eligible worker during that return period. So it's not including any, other loadings or entitlements of other sorts. It's gross ordinary wages. Now, the corporation also needs the worker's date of birth, an email address and a phone number. there is a template that we have for one of our other schemes that's being modified for this new scheme. It's fairly straightforward information in a way. You know, who were they? How long during that quarter period did they work for you? What were their gross ordinary wages? Now, the budgeting for the levy payments side of things, the levy payments are expected to be 1.7% of their workers' gross ordinary wages per quarter. Now, I hear what Chris was saying earlier about, you know, the strain, and while this is the intention of this scheme is that it will build the industry, however, you know, that additional financial burden, the last thing we'd like to see is it actually taking away from service delivery. So we totally, from our team, support the efforts of NADA, of NCOS, and of others who are lobbying for these levies to, you know, to be either all or partially covered. One good bit of news on the levies is, you know, these levies amounts go into a fund. Now, this is quite a specific fund that is there for future long service leave claims. It doesn't just disappear into the big government coffers. It is a fund that is invested, you know, that is intended to grow itself as well. Now, with the contract cleaning scheme that already exists, that fund has been able to be increased to such a point that last year they actually reduced the levies rather than increasing them. That levy went down from 1.7% back down to only 1% because of the amount of money that's been able to be built up in the fund. No guarantees for this one for the future, but there has been precedent set, I think, for the levy amount to come down, and I think that's a, you know, a positive thing that may come from this. Now, one thing I will share with the group today, and this is only hot off the press news, from 1 July, these responsibilities will be, so employers will need to determine their predominant purpose, register, start tracking their workers' service, but there will be a staged introduction of the need to make the levy payments. That's not, you know, while it's a quarterly return, the first return, and we do want employers to be on board and completing their returns, those returns won't need to be submitted until April 2026. The levy payment won't need to be submitted until April 2026. You are hearing this for the first time. That, you know, the intention of that too is that it will give people longer to budget and plan and prepare for the scheme to come in. You know, for a lot of organisations, we don't want it to impact service delivery. So that longer time period to budget and plan will hopefully position people better to be ready for it by April next year. But that need to record and have your service returns ready will apply from July 1st. Any questions on that one?
Thanks, Michaela. We have questions about, do you know how the levy was actually calculated?
I believe that it was in keeping with other schemes, both interstate and, you know, in New South Wales. But exactly who determined the 1%? No, I think it was also included as part of consultation that has happened. But that is what is expected to be the rate when it comes in.
Thank you. And when will the online employer registration be open?
That will be open from 1 July. So that will be, you know, an online portal. We'll basically, you know, there'll be more training to come on that beforehand. Employers will need to determine, you know, sign a declaration or complete a declaration regarding their predominant purpose and go through an online process. We don't need the workers' details to come in. So we won't actually get the workers' details until those first service returns come in April 2026. So just sounding out there on terms of that foundation worker bonus, any workers who are included on the first 2 service returns from an organisation will be automatically registered as foundation workers and get that bonus. So when we get what will be 3 quarters of returns from April onwards, we will then go through and look at those first 2 quarters and make sure all of the workers who were included on those are registered. If a worker is left off, or if an organisation doesn't register and they should have, workers will have the option to come to us, and there'll be a process then on, you know, talking to that employer, reviewing their predominant purpose assessment, But where it's determined that the workers should have been registered, their registration can be backdated, and also their foundation worker status can also be backdated as well. So workers won't miss out if their employer hasn't got on board. Now I'll go to the final slide. So next steps on this one, we've started up an online newsletter subscription, and there's a link to our subscription, our web page, and the subscription link is on there. It's given this is quite detailed information, and there's a lot of resources still to come, we would encourage everybody to sign up for that newsletter, and that will be a way where we can actually share the steps as they're coming in and make people aware of each of the stages of the implementation and what's required at each stage. Now, I mentioned that we are developing resources, so the category descriptions and these guidelines on determining predominant purpose will be available soon. We're having a workshop with industry representatives for that on Monday, so I'm hoping that after that we will be able to start sharing that information. And I also mentioned that template for tracking worker service is also being developed as well. Now, once we get closer, we'll be running a lot more of our own education sessions. Certainly happy to come along to any meetings and share the word and awareness. But once we actually get to that point of action steps for employers, we'll be running online, metropolitan and regional sessions on how people, to give education on that and what people need to do to get on board. Now, our contact details are on there. So the two links for the web page and for the subscription link. But our email address is on there, communityservices@longservice. We will take inquiries through that line and provide, our responses directly back to workers or employers. Or people can also call the Long Service Corporation on 131441.
Thanks, Michaela. We've got a range of different questions. I'll ask some of these now, and then we'll move to the second presentation. Is there any, you've talked about some forms that will be coming to assist. Is there any software that will be available to assist organisations with the reporting?
Not that has been determined as yet, no. There will be with the other two schemes, there's an online portal, and there are some, online options for lodging information, and workers eventually will be able to go into their own record and update details and things. Not software that I'm aware of, but I'm just jotting that down as something to follow up, and I'll come back to you on that one, Chris.
Great. A question about the breaks in service. Is that 4 years cumulatively, or could someone or per break in service? So there could be more than one 4-year block?
There can be more than one 4-year block. You can come back, do another 6 months in the industry, go elsewhere again. You reset, basically. Yeah.
Great. Is the April payment for the levy from the 1st of July this year?
Yes. So we're still dealing with them as quarters. So the first quarter will be July through to September. That payment normally would have then been due by the 14th of October, but under these circumstances, that payment won't be due until April. Similarly with the next quarter, from October through to December, the return will need to be completed and the payment budgeted for, but it doesn't actually have to be physically made until April.
Great. And if someone joins the scheme, remains engaged in work for a couple of years and then leaves the industry, what happens to that money?
If it's under the 5 years, unfortunately, they haven't met any of the eligibility to make a claim. But if they have reached the 5-year point and are leaving the industry, then they can cash out what has been paid in. So that pro rata payment towards, what would have gone to leave, but they can actually cash it out as a cash payment. So yes, if it's under the 5-year amount, unfortunately, if they leave after 4 years, and then their balance for the 4 years will stay there. But if they're still out of the industry after another 4 years, then their balance will go.
Thank you. We might move to Carol and Paula next, and we hope that we'll have time for more general questions after that presentation. Thank you, Carol and Paula.
Alrighty, I hope that I'll be able to share my screen correctly. So please bear with me as I try to make this thing work. Okay. You would think after all this time, I would be able to do this. So I think you're actually seeing my whole screen at the moment. I'll try and make it look a little bit better.
Just like
Less distracting. All right. So so given that, you know, we've had some broad information up until today, what we're presenting from our side is also a little bit broad. You won't see me referring to any rates in particular, or I've not yet referred to what the inputs are in terms of how do you calculate the amounts. But I think Michaela's given us a really good overview of what those details are. So what we'll focus on is what we believe the three also biggest changes to how you might account for and present your financial information in the context of portable long service leave. So we've identified your budgeting, your accounting and reporting, and then the actual paying or the cash out as potentially the three areas where you'll see and feel the biggest change between portable long service leave and however you're doing it right now. So first we'll look at budgeting. And I think the question that we asked ourselves was, will this actually be different? Because budgeting is just budgeting. It's a bit of a guess. So currently what we're seeing, and you know, among the attendees, you may not be doing it exactly this way, but it's pretty common. You typically budget for long service leave by, you know, looking at your historical trends. How have people accumulated or taken it in the past, as well as looking at who might take long service leave over the next year. And then you do a calculation and you put a number in your budget. It's pretty typical of how most of the clients we work with do it, because it is a difficult number to kind of put together. But going forward, once you have either your organization registered or your employees registered with the scheme, you will then be able to actually use that levy rate and then, you know, the inputs that are required to work out what the payment should be. You'll be able to use that rate, use the inputs, and actually work out what the number will be. So over time, it should actually be a more accurate way of budgeting for long service leave, because, you know, once the scheme is in full effect, you'll know exactly what you have to pay. So in some ways, portable long service leave will make an element of your budget a lot easier to do. But I know Michaela did talk about that line in the sand. So 1 July onwards is when you apply the rate and the calculation, but you are still responsible for the leave that's accumulated up until that point. So you'll get a lot of clarity for the future, but what you already have, you might still have to use these guesses and projections. So working towards clarity, but still using a little bit of your current methodology as well. And so the second thing that we believe that you'll see some changes in is how you account for it and how you report it. And I want to clarify that reporting means your management reporting or maybe the financials that you present to the board, not the reporting that you do to the Long Service Leave Corporation. That's a different thing. So currently, like I was referring to in the budgeting section, when you're accounting for your leave, it's actually a little bit of an art form. It's probably a formula that your accountant or your accounting team are using. And what the formula does is it looks at the years of service. It looks at the person's current salaries and on costs. It applies assumptions around how their salary might grow. It then applies another assumption about what inflation might look like to then try and give you a value for what everybody's long service leave balance is and how it grows and changes on a month by month or a period by period basis. And what you should be seeing is that in your profit and loss and balance sheet reports, you'll see a long service leave provision or a leave provision, and you'll see a leave liability that grows and moves on your balance sheet. So that's potentially how you're doing it right now. How you might do it in the future, again, probably is going to get a lot easier. There'll be fewer assumptions that you'll have to apply, noting that there's that line in the sand of 1 July. But for future movements and changes, you'll be able to use the levy rate as well as the other inputs that are required to calculate what the long service leave amount will be. And then you'll be able to then record that on your P&L as a long service leave expense. And then instead of adding it to your leave liability balance, it'll just simply be an amount that is payable to Long Service Leave Corporation. So whilst they still hit very similar areas on your profit and loss and your balance sheet, the practice of it slightly different. So in a lot of ways, this is going to make your parts of your accounting and reporting a little bit easier than what you might be doing today.
It's going to be similar to super, the way that super's treated.
Yes, that's a really good way to think about the concept as well. So hopefully that makes it a little bit less confusing for anyone who's not an accountant or who's not a financial person. And then lastly, where we think the biggest difference will be is actually the paying of it. So currently what you do is, you estimate how people's long service leave balances are growing. You do a huge calculation to work out what the value might be, noting that you don't have to pay it right now, but you might have to pay it 5, 7, 10 years from now. And so you do these calculations, you put these expenses in your P&L each month, you build up a liability on the balance sheet, but you might not actually pay it for years and years and years and years, actually. And sometimes you don't even pay it at all if someone leaves before they become entitled to get a pro rata payout. But going forward, and again, noting that line in the sand of 1 July, there'll be virtually no gap between when you calculate the long service leave cost and when you pay it. As Michaela explained to us, once the scheme is fully underway, every quarter you do the calculation, you essentially tell Long Service Leave Corporation, I owe you this much for my employees' long service leave. And then per the payment terms, you will shortly after have to pay it out. So that gap between building up the liability and actually paying it out is now drastically shortened from a potential 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years to, pretty standard payment terms you might have with any other supplier. So when we look at the 3 big areas of change, we've really identified this as the most significant area of change. And I think based on some of the questions we've seen in the Q&A, I think attendees have picked up on that same significant change as well. But I've talked a lot now, and maybe I'll just check in with Paula to see if she wanted to mention anything as well.
I think you've done a very good job. Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you both. That's fantastic. Thanks for walking us through that step by step. And yes, you're right. There are lots of questions coming through around what happens to the funds that go into that levy fund that aren't claimed. Yeah, I wonder, Michaela, if you can speak a little more to that. If people don't, leave before they're able to make a claim, does the money get returned anywhere? What happens to the money?
Look, unfortunately, the money can only get paid out under the terms of the Act or what's provided for in the Act. So You know, as Carol mentioned there, it happened before and will happen after the scheme, that sometimes people have just decide that this is not the right place for them, and they move on before they get any, you know, entitlement. So, you know, unfortunately, that will happen. There will be situations where an employer's been paying in on behalf of a person. That person leaves their organisation. Now, if that person leaves the industry altogether, then I suppose that money just stays in as part of the building up of the fund. But if that person leaves one organisation and goes on to another organisation within the community services space, their money stays and still keeps accruing. So I suppose it comes down to if they're leaving community services altogether. You know, they can change roles within community services to do any of the different 31 types of community services work. But if they do opt to leave the sector, then same as, you know, pre-scheme, if it's before any entitlement is there, then unfortunately that money from the employer's perspective stays with the fund. But yeah, the employee doesn't get to see any benefit out of that.
Thanks, Michaela. And as you mentioned before, in the cleaning industry, as funds pooled because they weren't accessed by people remaining in the scheme, that then meant that the rate was able to be lowered over time, which is something that we can look for and hope for in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. We had a question about retiring. So the years worked in the sector aren't backdated. Are there going to be any benefits for workers who are getting close to retiring? Now, I know you talked about the bonus 365 credits, but have you got any advice on that question?
Look, only, and I hear that one because I'm getting closer myself as well. It'll come down to, you know, whatever act you can call upon, whether that be the 1955 Act. If somebody's up to 10 years under that Act, then they'll have entitlements. Before or after the scheme comes in, those entitlements still exist. The only one I can really give on that is if they've been with the scheme for 5 years and they want to retire after that point, then they can, you know, cash out of the scheme. But if it's before that 5-year mark, unfortunately, there's not a lot we can offer them there. No.
Okay, and there have been questions also, understandably, around concerns from organisations who are already financially stressed and have difficulty making existing funding cover all areas. And as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, NADA, NCOS and other NGO peaks are continuing with our advocacy to request that the cost of the scheme be included within the current funding. So just reiterating that, we will keep members updated as we hear about any progress on that front. We also just have one final question, which is for the 30 June 25 financial statements, long service leave would be a liability on the balance sheet. Are there any adjustments we need to make once the scheme starts? I will hand over to Carol and Paula for that one.
Oh, lovely. So this is the line in the sand, Alex. So as Michaela mentioned, that's the line in the sand we have. The org is responsible for any leave that has accumulated up to 30 June. So you go through your normal process up to 30 June 2025. That's your line in the sand. And if your org or your employees are eligible to be registered, then you will then have to account for any leave they accumulate from 1 July onwards under the new scheme. But it is still your responsibility to maintain and then pay out at some point, potentially, any leave that they've accrued up to and including 30 June 2025. So it's just where we draw the line.
Thank you, Carol. Well, that concludes our presentations, and at the moment there's no further questions coming through. So I'd just really like to thank everybody for tuning in this afternoon. We've had great attendance, fantastic questions coming through. Please, if you've got questions that occur to you after we finish up, contact me either at chris@nada.org.au, or my contact details are available on the NADA website as well. We're really keen to have ongoing engagement around this. Michaela also shared her details and is really happy to be contacted, which is great. Subscribe to the e-news via the corporation website, but we will also keep members updated as well. And the slides and the recording from today will be available within the next week. We'll put that up on the NADA website under our resources tab. Again, thanks so much. Have a great afternoon. Thank you to our wonderful speakers today, and I really hope that's been helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.